All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Briana Seeley. We're at Adelsheim. It's Tuesday, January 20th, 2020. And thank you so much for joining us today, Briana. We appreciate this.
Thanks for being here.
Well, let's start with the most important question, which is why wine? What brought you into this industry?
Yes, so that answer, it goes way back for me. I grew up in restaurants and in the food and beverage industry. My parents have owned and operated restaurants their whole lives, so my whole life. And through that, I just fell in love with the food and beverage industry from a very young age. And the path that food and wine has taken me on is something I never really could have imagined. So some of my earliest memories in restaurants were at 5 years old, walking through kitchens, yelling behind, and people looking at me like, what is this 5-year-old doing in the kitchen? But I felt very comfortable. And so going through school, I loved to learn. From a young age, I remember loving school. But when I got to junior high and high school, it really shifted for me. Like the thing that had just intrinsically been in me around learning had shifted. And so I started working. I needed an outlet outside of school. And at 15, I got my first job as a busser in a restaurant. And restaurants kind of became my other school, a place where I learned so much about the world and, of course, wine. And I graduated from high school in 2003 and did not have good grades and didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, but the expectation was absolutely there that I would go to college. And starting at about 15 years old, when I was working in restaurants, my dad had a love for wine from a very young age, from his early 20s. And about 15 years old, we started sharing wine together, and we'd have these Sunday night dinners. He would open up a bottle of wine and talk to me about wine in a way that really it grabbed hold of me. And he talked about the place and the people, and he never told me what I should be tasting or what I was experiencing, but it was that connection between the moments that happen in wine. It just clicked. So I was going away to college and didn't know what I was going to do. I applied for Southern Oregon University and showed up in September of 2003, sight unseen. And really the biggest draw was that it was as far away as I could get from Lake Oswego, which was my hometown, and still be within Oregon. So I was in state tuition. And I remember getting there, and I've always been a big journaler and writer. And I had this moment of writing in my journal, and I remember writing, I feel like I can breathe again. And there was something about being there and in that place that really ignited this thing in me. So wine, the reason all of that comes into play is that I realized very quickly that my relationship with wine was not normal for an 18-year-old. And for Christmas that year, I asked for Willamette Valley Vineyard's Founders Reserve 1998 Pinot Noir for a case, naturally, not, bottle wouldn't do. My parents obviously didn't buy that for me, but I just knew that this was something I had to continue with, and the curiosity continued. And the beauty of Southern Oregon is that it was this wine region that I had no idea existed. And by the time I was of legal drinking age, I had been working in restaurants around Ashland, which is a wonderful food town, and had been exploring the wineries and vineyards around Southern Oregon. And that was my junior year. My senior year, I was cramming in 20 credits a term, just trying to finish school. And I had to do a business plan of something that spoke to me. So I decided that I would do a boutique wine distributor. And I remember, I will never forget going to my professor for the capstone project and telling him that this is what I was going to do, and he just looked at me like I was crazy. He couldn't understand why this 3-tier system existed, how it could be profitable, the whole thing. He basically told me no. And so that was my starting point. Once I get a no, it's like, okay, great, now let me go figure out how to make this happen. So I'm very grateful. There was a woman who was running the MBA program at SOU at that time who came from a wine growing region, and she knew exactly what the 3-tier system was and was able to articulate it and kind of advocate on my behalf for yes, she needs to move forward with this. So the only requirements were I had to be 35 pages, have full, real financials, a legit business plan, and I had to interview 10 people within the industry. And I had no idea, there's no way I could have known where this all would take me, but I knew that I was completely passionate about this project and about the wine industry. So I went through these 10 interviews, which were incredible. Everyone from, restaurateurs that were running wine programs to small wholesalers, sales reps, a lot of names that are still in the industry today. And my final interview that I had was at the Medford branch of what was then Columbia Distributing, still around but in a different form. And it was with Kelly Rhodes, who was the vice president of that branch. And I interviewed him for an hour and a half and had all my, perfect questions together. And at the end of the interview, he looked at me and he said, "So what are you going to do next?" And I had no idea. I hadn't even gotten that far. I was so engulfed in this project. And it really was the first time I had that moment of, okay, wait, sales is not the thing that I've always thought sales was. You can sell something that you love, that you feel so strongly about, to people that feel the same way about what they're doing. And so that's where that connection between selling wine and restaurateurs, like that marriage happened for me. And from that moment on, I knew that was what I was going to pursue. So it was great. I politely declined because he offered me a job, and I politely declined because I wanted to come back to Portland. Moved back to Portland and spent the year traveling the world and interviewing with Young's Columbia. And by September of 2008, I had been to 9 countries and tasted wine everywhere from Chile to Germany, and I landed a job at 22 years old with Young's Columbia as a sales associate for on-premise. And I took to it like a fish to water. It was just awesome. I was having a blast. And by November of that year, for those who have been exposed to the wholesale industry in a big way, so that was 2008, that was when Columbia and Mount Hood merged. Big shakeups happening. It was also the time that Southern Wine and Spirits was coming into the Oregon market. So there was just a lot going on in the wholesale world. So I was very fortunate that I landed a sales route within 2 months of starting in wholesale. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to speak the restaurant language, and I knew I loved the product, and I loved the puzzle of trying to match the right wine with the right account, and seeing that magic come to life. So that was really how I got started. And then from there, I'm so grateful that I traveled the way I did, because it turned into a career, and I had no idea that that's what would happen. So let's see, so 08 until probably 2012 is when I just worked my way up through different sales routes. And during that time, I got my CSW. I also really fell in love with sake. Young's, to this day, has one of the greatest sake portfolios in Oregon in the country, and they have a sake samurai, Marcus Keyser. He became a mentor to me. So this whole alcoholic beverage, thing just kept snowballing for me. I just loved it. And by 2012, Young's was starting a fine wine division in Oregon, and it's the entity that they still operate with today, which is called the Estates Group. And I was selected to be one of the first sales reps for that division and building that out. And we really operated as a company within a company. And by the time I moved on from Young's in early 2019, I was the vice president of the Estates Group, the fine wine division. And at 33 years old and 11 years into my career, I loved wholesale. I really enjoyed what I was doing. I was still learning, but I also realized I'm really good at this. I enjoy it very much, but I don't know what I don't know yet. And I had never been on the winery side of the business. And so much of what has driven me in the wine industry and in my wholesale years was connecting with the individuals at each winery, seeing their places, hearing their stories, drinking their wine, making those moments together. And I wanted to see what it felt like to be a part of that on the other side. And Joth Rickey was the CEO at Adelsheim at that time, and I sold Adelsheim my whole career at Young's, and then managed that portfolio for 7 years of that time. And he and I just kind of started having conversations, and Adelsheim, we're still going through changes. We were going through a lot of changes then, and understood that we had a need in the direct-to-consumer. You talked to Kelly, you're going to be talking to Gina. We have always made great wine. David Adelsheim, our founder, you can't tell the Oregon story without mentioning his name. What Gina does in the cellar with her team is incredible, and direct-to-consumer hasn't been an afterthought, but we haven't invested in it in a way that really, I think, stands up to who we are. And so I took a complete left turn in February of 2019. I came to work here at Adelsheim as Vice President of Consumer Sales. And it was it was an interesting route to go, because I had been in wholesale, and consumer sales is the complete other side of the coin, but that was intentional. I knew that it tapped into my restaurant roots, but there would be enough that I didn't know that it would stretch me outside my comfort zone. So that's really kind of my long and winding path, through the industry. And the last year here at Adelsheim has been awesome. It's been so great to learn a lot more on the production side of things, connect with Oregon wineries in a different way. I was very connected in wholesale, and it's just opened up that world even more.
So I'm curious, you mentioned just sort of growing up in restaurants and being around restaurants, and obviously you mentioned kind of learning wine through your father and that kind of special. Why wine versus food or some other part of the restaurant? What was it that kept wine coming back as the main thing you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because my mom is a classically trained chef, and food is very much a part of our world. Sundays, what I didn't mention about the Sunday dinners is that in our house, Sunday is your Saturday, right? When you're in restaurant, Saturday is your Friday, Sunday is your Saturday, and that was the day we ate. It was like we woke up, my mom made a huge breakfast, cleaned up, my mom made a huge dinner. So food is right in there with it, and I love to cook myself. But one of the things of growing up in restaurants is that I knew I didn't want to be in daily operations. Seeing that lifestyle, my parents did an incredible job of being there for my sister and I am so grateful for the sacrifices they made. And I knew that I wanted a different lifestyle. I wanted to be home in the evenings and be able to take vacations and things like that. So when I learned, that's why the wholesale route was initially where I went. It was like, okay, this is a Monday through Friday thing. It was crazy when I got my first route. My then boyfriend, now husband, was like, what are you doing out till 9 o'clock? You go to work at 8 and you're supposed to come home at 5. But I would just go sit at restaurants and work at the bar, and it felt so strange to have my evenings free. So that was really, it was a lifestyle. It was a very intentional career choice at that point.
Tell me about learning that part of wine, coming at it from the angle of sales and of distribution. What did you know that you already needed to know? What did you have to learn once you got into sales from that perspective?
I had to learn so much. I had no idea how much I had to learn. I knew what I knew already was how to tell stories. So I would go to tech sheets and I would read about wineries, and I did a lot that way. But what I really had to learn was, I talked a little bit earlier about matching the right wine with the right account, qualifying accounts, figuring out, okay, these are the goals we have as a wholesaler, which is the reality, right? How do I match that up with my account base in a way that feels really good for everyone, where I'm selling them a product that will pull through, and they're getting a product that they feel excited about. That was a huge piece that I had to learn. And then I got my CSW because I had no idea, I didn't know about Burgundy or Bordeaux or, Germany. I had tasted some wines from around the world, but I had only been legal drinking age at, a year at that point. So,
as you're telling those stories and finding those right matches, what was it you were looking for when you were telling a winery story, and what was it you were looking for in terms of how that would fit? What made it a good match?
It really depends on the restaurant account and what the needs were for the business. So if it was a more corporate account and, depending on their clientele, it was finding, maybe a more recognizable winery or brand that fit with their program. If, my first territory was the Inner East Side, up and down division before it looked like it does today, and it was considered a C territory, which is crazy because now it's an incredible, food scene. And so if it was a more, esoteric, smaller East Side chef-driven restaurant, it was finding something that, if they were organic and sustainable, biodynamic, female-owned, finding that thread, that really connected.
You mentioned kind of coming into the distribution side at a time of great change in distribution. Something we've heard a lot from the production side or from the sales side in the past is how much more difficult it's getting to sell wine now versus as those consolidations. Tell me about the consolidation and about what that meant for you and how you saw things change for your job specifically as you kind of grew into fine wine sales.
So that's a big question. There's a lot of elements to that. Because consolidation is still happening. It's amazing that it's almost 15 years later, right? And we're still kind of in that mode. So the other thing that I didn't mention about that time is that it was right when the recession was really starting to hit the Oregon market. So working in an industry, in a company during a time of consolidation, really what I've learned through my career, this has been kind of a theme that has come up over and over again, is change, and looking at those really terrifying situations as opportunity. That's really, the only way you can thrive and survive and get through it is, okay, this is I'm in a new territory for the third time this year. I just got to know those buyers. How do we move forward? And just finding those opportunities and the positive bright spots in it and moving forward with that, because otherwise it's debilitating and it's impossible. And one of the things that I say to my team here, I used to say it at Young's all the time, is that putting any energy that you put towards your competitor is energy you could be putting towards yourself and your own growth. And that was something that I focused on, laser focused on when we were going through these really rough times, and our competitors would try to, go out in the market and say, well, Young's is going through this really tough time, so make, move your business away from them. And yes, of course, that happens to a degree, but using that as your leading selling point, it didn't serve me, I guess. Was there a second part to the consolidation?
I'm curious how you saw the relation. When we talk to the people who have been selling wine a long time, and they talk about it used to be lots and lots of distribution, lots of options, fairly easy to get your wine. As the industry grew and the distribution consolidated, it's the opposite of that now. So I'm curious how you saw relationships change, and how you saw your job change, either for the better or the worse as those changes were happening. I know it's a big question, but just sort of from your perspective, what you saw.
One thing that I'm amazed by still to this day is the loyalty that consumers or restaurateurs, buyers have to a winery or a brand once they've had an experience. It's usually an experience at the home base or with the founder. That is something that is unshakable. So that's a benefit, right, to any business, that the consolidation can happen and there's a certain amount of loyalty that they will buy wine from that wholesaler because they care so much about having Adelsheim. And then there's a degree of, I've had it, I can't do business with that person and I want to go back to how I got my product. So it's a challenging time. Anyone in the wholesale market would tell you that right now. The year that the whole industry had from Young's and the RNDC and just many changes continuing to happen across the entire West. It's a tough time. I would say prioritization becomes really challenging as consolidation continues, how everyone gets their share and gets their airtime. It's really hard for a sales rep to have hundreds of wineries that they're representing and going through that process I was talking about of finding the perfect wine for the perfect account. It becomes more challenging as you have more and more wineries in a portfolio.
It's So you're in direct DTC work now, which you thought was something that had been kind of overlooked here perhaps before. Tell me about how direct sales has changed in the wine industry, and specifically what you were looking to do here that was different or new.
Yeah, so direct sales has changed. I mean, not just in the wine industry. We know globally it's changing, right? And it's interesting because we have a unique opportunity as wineries. People are not going to brick and mortar, shopping establishments as much as they once were, but they are very interested in experiences. So we have an opportunity to provide really incredible experiences, and we're sitting in our caves right now, and this is something that we can offer people, and those moments are, I don't take that lightly. I don't take it lightly when people choose to share their time with us. It's something I talk about with my team a lot here as well, is, in Oregon specifically, we have so many wonderful things we can do on a given day. You can wake up on a Saturday in downtown Portland and go skiing or go hiking or go surfing even in the middle of winter. And so when people decide to go to wine country, okay, they're on their way here, and then they're on their way to wine country, and now there's 800 wineries in the state of Oregon. So when they finally get to our parking lot, the opportunity to meet that guest and that customer and provide an experience it's an honor. It really is. And I think that moment, how you deliver on that moment, is that's what's becoming more and more competitive, and that's what I see changing in the industry. Where it used to be, even when I was first wine tasting, you could cruise out to any winery and it was just very, a tasting bar, and you tasted the wine and you liked it or you didn't, and that was a wonderful experience. And so as consumers, I think our baseline of what a wonderful experience is has shifted. Those moments still exist, and there are a lot of wineries that are doing that very well, but we needed a little bit of a refresh.
So what are you looking for when you're talking about experiences? What are consumers looking for, and what are you trying to offer them? Obviously, you talk about sort of experience-based, individual-based, so how do you meet that need at a place like Adelsheim?
Well, we talk a lot about meeting people where they are. So I really believe, we have, just like a lot of the wineries right now, we have a vineyard hike and we have this cave experience, and we have some really wonderful kind of more elaborate experiences for people that really want to get in there. But an experience is also a moment across the bar that is shared, where you are engaging with that guest in a way that they feel like, okay, they see me, they hear me, they're curious about what is interesting to me. That's really, experiences, it's very broad, but those moments, they matter.
As those kind of demands have changed for consumer experiences, are you finding that consumers are also more interested in things they weren't interested in before, and are they asking different questions of the wine industry? I know you're new to this position, but are they more interested in terroir? Are they more interested in the history? Are you finding more educated consumers?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we all have so much information at our fingertips. So even if someone is on their way here reading up on Adelsheim, and they can get on our website and, correct us if we state something incorrectly as well. So definitely, I think the consumer is more educated. I think wine is just becoming, across the board, more approachable. It's talked about in social settings and in music in a different way than maybe it ever has been. So the questions, though, they really range. It depends on what the individual's interest is based around. But we get everything from vineyards and whether we source or estate to winemaking styles. The main theme that I see kind of across the board, and mostly in kind of our younger consumer, is sustainability. What we do, not just sustainability from a farming and winery practice, but how we take care of our employees. We get a lot of comments about our. We have a people page on our website and bios of our team, and I'm amazed how many people comment on those elements. You hear the word authentic used a lot right now, and I feel like the consumers are digging a little bit for are you or aren't you? And how much of this is a marketing spin on authenticity and how much of it is real? And I feel very fortunate. It's one of the things that drew me to Adelsheim, that we, going back to 1971 and what David and Ginny created and what we're still doing today, we are very authentic and we can tell that story and answer those questions with real answers.
You talked earlier about David Adelsheim and about sort of not being able to tell the story of Oregon without him in it. Obviously, I'm curious if there's an added pressure working at a place like this, working for one of the pioneer wineries that's been around that long. Do you feel that in any way like you're leading the industry in a certain way, or setting a tone when you're working at a place like this?
Yes, I wouldn't use the word pressure. I think that we feel very privileged to carry on his legacy and hopefully continue to fine tune things. And David Adelsheim is very humble in how he talks about the things that he's done, and so part of our job is to naturally introduce some of those things into our presentations here. So an example I use a lot is David introduced the Dijon clone of Chardonnay to Oregon. Chardonnay, people are tearing out Pinot Gris vineyards and planting Chardonnay, and we all love Oregon Chardonnay now, and that was a huge turning point in the Oregon wine industry. And it's those moments that I guess that's where pressure would come in, is making sure we're checking those boxes and carrying on his legacy. But I also think it's really important to be looking forward and talking about what Gina is doing and how she's making the best possible wine she can and staying relevant, and the things that Kelly is doing in the vineyards from sustainability, and the crew that we've had for over 2 decades, which I'm sure she's talked about.
What about, just to shift a little bit here, I'm curious more about marketing as well as sales, obviously tied in together. How has wine marketing changed since you've been in the industry, and what are you doing differently now that maybe you wouldn't have been doing before?
Wine marketing has changed in some ways drastically, and in others not at all, in my opinion. We're still doing tech sheets, and websites, are more interesting and more engaging, but they still have a lot of the same content that they had when I started in wholesale. What I see changing, of course, is social media and how that really has come into play, product placement, influencers, all those things. I think it's confusing for the consumer to know what's what. That's where that authenticity comes in, and then you still have Wine Spectator and scores and consumers that are driven by that, which is very old school and in some cases still very relevant, in a lot of cases still very relevant. So I think social media is probably the main way that it's changed. Outside of that, I think there's a bigger need to work in the community in ways we already were, but to be even more intentional about who you partner with and how you do that, because those things you want to make sure it aligns with your business, because there's a very good chance that will be out there in the world for one of your consumers to see, and we're very intentional about that here.
On that note, you teamed up with the Blazers last year to celebrate their 50th anniversary. Tell me about that project and why Adelsheim and the Blazers? What was the comment? What was the meet up there?
Yeah, so I came on board almost as that project. We were kind of in the early launching stages of that. The conversation really started with Joth when he was still here, and I think the main thing is that we're two kind of heritage Oregon brands, I guess you could call us, right? The Blazers and Adelsheim, and we're coming up on our 50th anniversary here next year. So it was a really interesting project to be a part of. In a lot of ways, super natural fit, and in some other ways, it stretched us in a good way. We saw some of our biggest days of the year were a result of partnering up with the Blazers for club release parties or Blazer launch parties, things like that, just from a foot traffic standpoint. There's a lot of great exposure out in the marketplace, and I hope that it helps people see us in a little bit of a modern light, and that we are still, every day waking up and thinking, how can we stretch? How can we be better? Because we are. But it was great. I mean, from a consumer standpoint, we saw a lot of foot traffic and people that we may not have otherwise seen.
So you were involved in the Women in Wine event the past summer, and also at the Assemblage just a couple of weeks ago. Tell me about your involvement, especially with the Women in Wine event, because I know you were part of the kind of organizing committee for that. What was your role, and why did you feel it was important?
Well, so Women in Wine, well, I'll back up a little bit. So when I was at Young's, I really, I had incredible mentors and allies within the company and outside the company. And it's no secret that wholesale is definitely, they're not at 50-50, men and women in roles, and have a long ways to go in all areas of diversity. And I know that all of the large companies and small companies, it's on the radar and everyone is aware of it. So that's great. So when I was at Young's, I was part of the founding Women's Partner Network group, and through that we established a mentorship program that really took off. So it became something that I was talking about this recently with someone, and sometimes you have to build your own bridge to get to a place, and that came up at Assemblage because it wasn't there, but when I asked the question, people would say yes, and I knew there was a need for someone besides me. I was when I left Young's, I was the most senior female in the Northwest, and the next level of female in leadership was a district manager. So I wanted to be a part of bringing women up through the organization. So through that, I attended many different conferences and talks and seminars and all sorts of things, and Young's was great about saying, like, yes, go, tell us what you learned, let's learn together. And at one of those events, Susan Sokolblosser and I had breakfast with Harold McGovern, who was running the Northwest, or still is running the Northwest for Young's. And we were talking about, like, okay, Oregon does a really good job of getting together and making things happen and sharing, so many of the stories that you hear, I'm sure, go back to people sharing. And we have a lot of women in the business in many different areas, but they don't really we're not all connected, we're not networking together yet, and we don't really get the airtime. Like, how do we start to put something together here? So Susan and Allison and I and Carrie Anderson and Cheryl Wilkerson, who both work for Young's as well, we all kind of came together and started this conversation a few years later. And it just sort of, it was amazing, really, because it started as, okay, we're going to do this thing, and we know we need to bring in some really wonderful speakers, and we started this project, and then it just took off like a rocket ship. It was like we couldn't even, there was such a need, and people were so hungry for interesting conversations and navigating this world together. And so for year one, I was, we were a steering committee last year, so I was the chair of the steering committee. This year I'm president of the board, so we're an official 501c6, and next year I'll move out of the president role and our VP will move into president. So moving forward, it will only be a one-year term because we are 100% volunteer-based board. We have 15 board members this year. And it's it's a part-time job, really, managing, and but it's been wonderful. And Allison Sokolblosser and Christine Clare and a number of other women on our board have really been instrumental in just moving this thing forward. So my involvement last year was mostly on the programming side, but then once I moved into that chair position, it was checking in with all of the different subcommittees and making sure we were all on the same page. And then I don't know if you attended. I know Lily attended, but yeah. And
these two did, yeah.
Oh, great. So I'll share. It's kind of hard to leave out this very personal aspect of what happened, but when I started planning Women in Wine, or when we started planning Women in Wine, it was probably 2017 when the conversation started, and then 2019 was our first official event. in March 7th of 2018, I had a brain hemorrhage and a tonic-clonic seizure, and we discovered that I have a mass in my brain. And it was, I was 33 years old, and I have 4.5-year-old twins. My twins were 2.5, almost 3 years old. I was vice president of a states group. It was just like this totally out of left field thing, super rare. And when you talk about having to stretch, personally and professionally, it stretched me in a way I didn't know I could. And Women in Wine, what was so awesome about the day when it finally got there, which was July 7th or 8th, it was the Monday after 4th of July weekend, which was unfortunate, but we, going into it, all of a sudden I realized I am going up against one of my biggest fears right now. I had really didn't have a fear around public speaking prior to my brain hemorrhage, but anyone who's been through any sort of brain injury, it's a long, slow wake up, and there's this time of like, okay, it's all there, I just need to find it, and kind of relearning things, or also things that just feel like getting on a bike and you know how to do it. But I had real fear around that. And I shared that in my opening because I didn't know what else to do, because I was ready to say, like, I'm not going to do this. And I realized this is exactly why we're doing this. We all have stuff. Like, that's my thing, but if we all sat here and took as much time as we needed, we all probably have a version of that. And that was my point in sharing, is we can't, those moments cannot define us. We have to find ways to support ourselves, to build a network. And I was so grateful when I went through that experience that I already had a wonderful kind of medical team. Ended up being a team, not great to have a medical team, but I had a wonderful naturopathic doctor and some other people that helped me build a team. But I also had an incredible network professionally that really lifted me up in a way that I don't know how I would have gotten through it otherwise. I had to take a month off of work, and coming back to work, I had my seizure at work. Talk about like ultimate vulnerability. And coming back into the workplace and just being embraced not only by my team, but by the whole industry, and just that outpouring of support I felt was incredible. And so my point in sharing all of that is that I did share a bit of that story in my opening at Women in Wine, because I felt like this is why we're all here. If I'm going to show up in the way that I want others to show up, it's valuable to share that. So Women in Wine is it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and we're in the thick of planning for 2020 right now, getting the program together. And then Assemblage, I'm not associated through board or anything like that. I've spoken with Rachel many times, and she has a really wonderful program that she has built, and it was so, it was incredible to attend her symposium a few weeks ago, because it really shows that there's plenty of space for all of us to explore this world, to hold each other, and kind of fill these different niches that we all have. Everyone has a different route that they need to be supported throughout their professional, their careers. But personal and professional, to me, they're one and the same. How we do anything is how we do everything, and so that's really the premise of it all, I guess.
I like that. It's good. How we do anything is how we do everything. That's a good philosophy.
It's not mine. I stole it from, I'm sure, someone.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We'll give it.
Okay.
So I'm curious. You mentioned once the Women in Wine started going, it took off quickly, and you were. And tell me what was the drive? What were the needs that people were coming to you? I assume there were consistent messages coming from people like, we need this in the industry. What were you hearing at the time, and how did your programming reflect those needs?
One that was just kind of like right out of the gates, and I think it's still, and this will be relevant probably forever, is professionalism, supporting just, anything. Yeah, professionalism is the word I use, because in our industry, people come from so many different backgrounds, and even if you have a college education, it doesn't mean that you understand how to navigate inside of a wholesaler or, inside of a winery, and we're working with so many different people coming from so many different directions. Being on the winery side specifically, you have number of different entities coming together. So the professionalism is one thing in particular. So that looked like we had a leadership workshop. I also think the unconscious bias breakout session definitely speaks to that, although that is, touches every part of our industry or the world. Really, we all need to, be aware of those blind spots. And then there was an inspirational aspect to it that we knew we wanted. We didn't know how much people wanted it. So because it was year one and we were doing this based off of conversations we were having within a relatively small group, we didn't know how well some of these things would be received and what people would stick to. So obviously having Cheryl Strayed there was incredible, and I don't know how we're going to top that this year. But she was wonderful. But then, Meg Crofton, who was the former president of Disney Parks and Resorts, she really brought that professionalism and an inspirational aspect together in a nice way. So the feedback that we got was really, people loved the being inspired, but inspired by people that were doing things that they felt like, okay, that might not be the exact path that I'm on, but I can do that. There was feedback that we got around, not having enough people from the wine industry speaking on their own paths. And that was honestly just a function of, it was hard to get people. Everybody has really, full schedules, and all of our speakers are volunteer-based, which is another, huge thing for our speakers to travel from all over to come support us. So.
As you look ahead, I'm curious. Obviously, the first year is a big, like you say, you don't know what you're getting into exactly. You don't know what people are going to respond to. What were the messages you got back that you're taking into this next year in terms of what people wanted more of, and were there things that caught you completely off guard that people were concerned about that had not come up before the actual symposium?
Oh, in Women in Wine.
Yes,
okay,
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Were there things that, in the feedback that you were like, oh, I never even thought of that. Like, what we need to do that now.
Well, I'll start with that. What we need to do now, and we're working on it, but we're not there, which is just diversity beyond women. It's hard because women in wine in itself to me already feels limiting, because when you look at our industry, it's, we have a long way to go across all aspects. And so I would say that that's something that definitely, it just struck me like, oh, that was a miss, that maybe this is a little bit confining. At the same time, we have a long way to go for women, and it's, it's a route that resonates immediately. So, as far as things that caught us off guard besides that, honestly, it was just the response. People were just so, they felt, they just really loved it. And it was, it's kind of like throwing a party, and you're like, are people going to show up? And if they do, are they going to have fun? And we thought it was good. But what's really magical to me about doing things like this, because at Young's we did lunches called Women Who Love Wine, and we would bring in a local guest speaker and then someone on wellness. And a lot of times, we had a perfect plan in place of like, oh, we'll put this person with that person, and then this winery with all, and it'll be these three, and they'll present in this way. And then, of course, things wouldn't turn out that way. And then what happened was something better than we ever could have imagined. And that's kind of what happened with Women in Wine, where there's sort of the event takes on a life of its own, and what ends up happening, I think, is exactly what people needed, And then, so I would say, I think I answered both aspects of that,
Absolutely. You mentioned your previous experience in wholesale distribution, being in a big minority as a woman in that industry. As your experience as a woman in the industry, how has that changed? As you have grown in the industry, how has your experience as a woman in it changed? Does it feel like it's getting better? Are the improvements there? Are there noticeable changes, or is there still that far to go?
There's still a ways to go. I think that, we see the most disparity at the top. There are very few women, specifically in the wholesale world, in that executive level. Supplier side of the world, so wineries and individual suppliers, I know we see a lot more women. but there's still a gap. The sales force, I'm seeing much more women. Like when I started at Young's, there was maybe 10% women in running sales routes, and now that team is probably, closer to 30 to 50%, depending on, the time and the routes and all that. So that definitely has shifted. The industry, it's tough. People don't know how to navigate it. And it's just like anything when you're working with a minority group, a lot of times it's on that group, unfortunately, to try to tell people how to fix that. And that doesn't quite feel right. And yet, I think it's sometimes a place to start. Like I said, all of my mentors, bosses, leaders, people said yes, but I was founding the Women's Partner Network group, and I was, bringing the things to the group. So, yeah, we have work to do.
So you're coming up on your 1-year anniversary here at Adelsheim. I'm curious, what are the things you're proudest of that you've done since you've been here, and as you look ahead, what comes next?
I'm proud of the team that we've put together. People are what make this all happen at the end of the day. And we have really worked hard to invest in our people, and both, in many aspects, education, finding things that engage outside of their daily tactical work. So that's a big one. We didn't have a club manager or a tasting room manager. We had really kind of a shell of a department when I got here, and so that it feels good to have those people in place and see the team start to gel. And then the other part of the question was just opportunities for.
I'm curious where you're looking next. You're coming up on a year. Where do you see your role and the team expanding as you look 5-10 years into the future?
Well, yeah, I'm spending a lot of time looking at 5 years into the future right now. That's super important. So for us, it's really, you asked the question earlier about like what's resonating with consumers. So it's a lot of data collection. It's the stuff that isn't as pretty and fun to do, but extremely important to making informed business decisions. And that was another thing that was not really in place when I got here. So building out our department financials and managing the department by channels, getting my team engaged in that so that when we talk about different channels that we can grow, why one area might be more profitable than another, things like that. So that's kind of the behind the scenes real, like business aspect of it that is important. And as we collect more data moving forward, and with that data, we can also make decisions about things like, okay, that isn't profitable, but our consumers love it. So we're going to continue doing it. And I think I'm fine making those decisions, but I want to understand if something isn't going to be profitable, or maybe, pencil out perfectly why we're doing it. So that's the big focus for me.
What about for yourself personally as you look ahead? Where do you see yourself as you look down the road?
Well, my moving to the winery side of the business is very intentional to diversify myself and grow more. I would love to run a winery someday. I find that it brings so many different, I was kind of talking about this earlier, it brings a number of different aspects together, and the complexity of that is super intriguing. I talk about wholesale a lot in a very complex way. Wholesale was, you have really 3 customers, 3 people that you're serving. You have your team, you have your suppliers that you're managing, and then you have the customers you're actually calling on. And then within that, you have all of the complexity of managing, thousands of SKUs. Managing a winery is very similar to that. You have production, you have vineyard management, you have consumer sales, you have national sales. All of these worlds operate very differently and have very different needs. And that complexity and the puzzle, and having to find ways to solve that puzzle really is super interesting and exciting to me. So that's definitely my goal.
How has the Oregon wine industry changed since you've become a part of it, and not just obviously in it as you are now, but as you were working in sales before? What's different about Oregon wine now than when you started, and what does the industry look like in 2020? Where do we stand right now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, the obvious, right, is that there's 800 wineries now. So navigating that world, right, how I talked about in wholesale, everyone getting their share, finding ways for us all to be relevant, because we are, and we all have different values and, sets of priorities that we're serving in the marketplace and as businesses, and different ways that we contribute to the Oregon market as a whole. I would say the main way that it's changed is just the number of wineries, which I'm sure you get that answer a lot. And within that, I think about, it was so much of our focus was on really big wineries and brands that people knew very well, which absolutely have their place, and we are very grateful for them in this industry. And towards the end of my time in wholesale specifically, I saw, we were seeking out small, couple thousand case wineries that were filling gaps in our portfolio. So there was just diversity of size and type and scope and what people were producing. And I guess that's really kind of the main juxtaposition that's happened from then to now.
Do you foresee there being a place for those size wineries as we go forward? Obviously, there's been a lot of consolidation already, and outside influence, outside money. Will there always be a place for those 1,000, 2,000 case wineries?
Absolutely. I mean, I think so. Because those people, if something speaks to you and you have to go do it, you have to go do it. So they're going to exist, and they should, it's what makes the whole wine world go round. And if you look anywhere in the world, that's what wine industries are made up of. And, we're young by global standards, and there's still, a couple thousand case wineries and million case wineries in all of those regions across the world.
What do you see as you look ahead for Oregon wine in general? What's it going to look like in 2030? What will the industry be 10 years down the road?
I do think that we'll see consolidation on the winery side of things, and that's just natural. I think it's cyclical, and we've seen people selling to larger suppliers, so they're within a portfolio. I think we'll see more of that. But I think on a global scale, we'll be known in a much different way, in the way that I think we deserve to be known, and I'm sure we can all agree on that. It's interesting how often we get people through the tasting room that will say, "I've never been to Oregon or the Willamette," and you have to politely repeat back to them Willamette. But Napa and Sonoma are wonderful, and they do a really great job at what they do. What we're finding is that people that have been going to Napa and Sonoma for 10, 15, 20 years, they're just adding us on to their rotation of wine country trips. And we're seeing people from East Coast, Midwest, in some cases all over the world. So that's been something that being on the direct to consumer side has really opened up my eyes to, wow, people are still just kind of discovering Oregon, which on the wholesale side of things, you're talking to industry pros who, it's their job to know what's going on in the world of wine. So it was very different. They were informed in a very different way than the consumer is. And so that's been, super eye-opening. I love it. I love seeing people from all over the country and hearing accents and all of it.
What challenge does that present to you in your job? If there are that many people still discovering or to be discovering, what is the challenge to you? How do you get them to discover?
Getting them to discover, I think, is on all of us in the Oregon wine industry, honestly. It's getting people here. And then, once they show up at Adelsheim, it's that delivering that experience that resonates, that creates what I call a brand ambassador for life. Once they've got that moment, they feel very connected to you. I would say that's the main thing.
If someone came to you asking for advice on how to get into the Oregon wine industry, what would your words of wisdom for them be?
make friends, just go bug people. I mean, you just need to get out there, and I'm sure part of it is because I went the sales route, and so it's that old adage, you get 99 no's before you get one yes, and so it's just like, you can not respond to me, but I'll keep bugging you, or I'll, go to someone else. And if you really want something, I mean, you just have to keep going, because if it's meant to happen, it will, and the right person will respond, the right person will say yes. I mean, I think about the team of people that took a chance on me at 22 years old, and that was my moment, right? And I believe that since I am meant to be in this industry, that I would have had another moment if it wasn't there with them. But that was my moment, and just pursue it fiercely.
That raises a question I meant to ask you earlier. You talked about the 99 no's before you get to one yes. How do you learn to live with that? How do you get that thick skin to be in the position you're in and get to being successful?
I mean, really, that's where the personal growth part comes in, and total clarity around myself and how I show up for everything. And I mean, I encourage my team with that. It's okay to fail. If you have given something, your all, and that you showed up the best way you can, and you got to know, then you just keep on going. And that's it.
That's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
No, I don't think so. Okay. Thank you for being here today.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story and your thoughts. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thanks.